Rama Raghava Rama Raghava Rama Raghava Rakshama Rama Raghava Rama Raghava Rama Raghava Rakshama.
We had the growing seedlings inside of the box and we exposed them from different wavelengths, and we found out that mostly these wavelengths were having negative impact, so the roots broke away. But only, I forgot the numbers, but the sounds of the streaming water was attracting them, and they were immediately growing towards the source of the sound. So I presume in soil, they can hear the water recording some kind of a cells which perceive these sound waves.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Iris spirogyra undergoing sexual reproduction. And note how the male cell has created a cellulose tube through which it is migrating to fuse with the female cell. Now, we have no knowledge, and what is worse, nobody is even trying to find out what the reason might be. We have no knowledge of how the one filament of cells detects the presence of the other. We have no knowledge of any of the systems by which they manage to break down the cellulose cell wall and create a tube that then conjoins and allows this juxtaposition of the one cell with the other. When I was in school, I was told that the male cell is forced out because it produces vacuoles which build up pressure, and it is forced out like toothpaste from a tube. But as you can see from the film, there is a gap around it. There is no pressure. It gets through because it wants to get through. Oh, by the way, now I mentioned to the technicians that the battery is running very low in several of your computers, so you may need to go and find a little lead. If we look elsewhere in the plant world, this is the first microscopic creature ever seen by a microscope, when in 1674 Antonio van Leeuwenhoek looked at volvox from the Berg-op-Zoom in the Netherlands, the lake on which he was travelling by boat, and he took some home in a little glass bottle and looked at it under his microscope. This is about 120 discrete cells, and they form into this wonderful translucent globe, which rotates through the beating of little cilia on the surface. Now, these daughter colonies that you can see inside, as they begin to mature, they actually form inside out. They form with the cilia for embryological reasons. They form with the cilia inside, whereas the cilia actually need to be outside. And so, as the daughter colonies grow, and this is beautifully filmed in time-lapse by my good friend Jeremy Ph.D. in Australia, you can see, here we have the daughter colony of cells, and watch very carefully. As they begin to mature, just over on the right, they know that they're the wrong way around. They know that they have to be everted. And so they slowly and methodically manage with graceful choreography to turn themselves completely inside out, so that the now formerly interior cilia are now on the outside, and it can start to rotate and spin, and in that way it can move away. Our present science is like medieval science. We're going to look back to the era of phlogiston. It really is, we're in an era now where the complexities of life are such that we need to be more humble and modest and understand that the sciences that we have so far erected, the reductionist sciences, are not going to go. We need something new. Physics can nibble around the edge of this, but it's like a child with a little...
I think we need both. The reductionistic approach and holistic approach. You cannot study holistic system without reductionism.
Incidentally, I first used the word holistic in a scientific journal in a leading article for Nature in 1973. That's when it appeared in the literature of science. So I'm a great believer in it. But holism means bringing together all of the studies that we have. I'm not saying we need to do that. I'm saying we need completely new studies and a lot more humility to generate them.
not an expert on Vedic religion, and I'm learning fast. My main area, as Joan said, is to do with science. I was originally evolution biology, and now it's science education. And because I sit within the Christian tradition, that's the one branch of religion that I know something about. And I think there are both important differences, but there are also commonalities with other religions. And the sort of shorthand of what I'll get onto in my talk is I'm always particularly interested in ways of understanding the relationship between science and religion that are absolutely faithful to the sort of standard scientific account in many of its specifics, but are also interested in a sort of broader understanding of why we're here, what's the meaning of life, what's the purpose of life, and so forth. And I'll try and exemplify that with particular reference to the issue to do with ethics, of what's the right way for us to behave. So I do want to start off with saying a little bit about the standard scientific account of the origin, evolution, and meaning of life, even though I've already learned that for some people here, that is absolutely not what they accept. The standard scientific account says that the origins of life are rather difficult to work out because they probably took place a few 100 million years after the Earth came into existence. In the standard model, that's about 4.7 billion years ago, and therefore it's so long ago when life took place that although it probably took place in an aqueous environment, something like today's hydrothermal vents in the deep ocean, we can't be sure. It might have been through clays. It's even perfectly possible, and still within mainstream science, that it didn't originate here, but arrived here in spores or whatever from somewhere else where it originally evolved. The usual scientific presumption is that either we'll one day be clearer about how life evolved, or we won't. It's as simple as that. The standard scientific account, so this is where I begin to depart from it, is materialistic, and that word has a number of meanings. It means it's not... Thank you, that's helpful. Sorry if that was not me speaking clearly enough. It's materialistic, the standard account of the evolution of life, in the sense that it's not idealistic, and it doesn't admit of anything other than physical entities, including fields, like gravitational fields, electromagnetic fields, and so on. So, of course, the standard scientific account wouldn't fully cohere with the account that I would have as a completely conventional mainstream Christian believer, for whom there is a creator, as it were, behind, or before, or beneath all of creation, who also sustains it from moment to moment. And the standard scientific account of the evolution of life puts a lot of weight on competition. We've already heard from the immediate preceding speaker about how Darwinian evolution talks about natural selection and random mutations as it does. But what many people don't quite realise is that the competition that Darwin emphasised was not so much competition between organisms and the environment, or between a predator and a prey. It's competition within populations of species. So, for example, it's the rabbit who is better at detecting the fox that is more likely to leave surviving baby rabbits. It is the fox that is better at catching the rabbit that is more likely to produce baby foxes. It's competition within populations. And therefore, for most scientists who don't have any sort of religious interest in life, there are two possible logical answers to the meaning of life. One of which is that there isn't any. So classically, dear old Richard Dawkins, when you read his writings, and like all of us, you have days when you feel more depressed when you try and write, and other days, occasionally talks about the universe being meaningless and bleak and futile. Well, we've all felt like that on some days, probably, but he sells rather more books than most of us The other answer, quite seriously, of course, is that humans have to construct, invent, or derive meaning. That's the other logical possibility for somebody for whom there isn't a religious framework to life. Okay, now there are various religious-inspired alternatives to the standard scientific account of the origin, evolution, and meaning of life, and I just want to emphasize the two most common ones. Words are always difficult, but by creationism, what I mean is the account within almost any of the world's religions, so Christianity, Judaism, various forms of Hinduism, Islam, and a number of other religions, that in some way the standard scientific account is contradicted. The standard scientific account, as you will know, has all organisms alive today descending from a common ancestor, the last universal common ancestor, Luca, a long time ago. There may have been several origins, but at some point the various lineages died out, except for one. So, to the creationist, though, it's not the case that all of life shares a common ancestor. So, for many creationists, it might be that the different species of deer that we see on the earth have a common ancestor, but they wouldn't accept that deer and, for example, giraffes have a common ancestor, certainly not deer and flowering plants, or deer and flesh-eating bacteria. For the evolution biologists, though, there is. And there are two main sorts of creationism, one of which is scientific creationism, so that's the branch which argues that when you go through the empirical evidence, you find that creationism is substantiated, and there's scriptural creationism, which starts from particular ones, the world scriptures, depending on which religious faith one has, because most of the world scriptures, not all of them, I realise that of course, but most of the world scriptures either weren't very interested in questions to do with evolution, or at least on straightforward reading, don't seem to fit fully with the standard scientific account. In the USA in particular, the theory of intelligent design grew up about 20 years ago because of the particular constitutional arrangements of the United States, which prohibit, roughly speaking, the teaching of religion in schools and other public places, and intelligent design makes no reference to religion or a creator. In many other ways it's very similar, and most of the advocates of intelligent design in the USA had previously self-identified as creationists, to the extent that the US courts have decided that intelligent design cannot be taught in schools either, for the same reasons that creationism can't, namely that it's basically religiously inspired. Now, this is the bit that I personally am most interested in, so this is me. This is about remaining true to the scientific account of the origin and evolution of life without contradicting deeper religious analyses of the meaning of life. And I want to say a little bit about emergence, because I've heard so far in this conference talks which have been rather keen on emergence, but I've also heard one or two occasions when people have not been so keen. So, in my usual way, I'm starting from a completely unconventional scientific position. All that's meant by emergence is that properties are found at a level above lower levels where they're not found. So the classic example that's usually given is about water being wet, literally damp, wet. So an individual water molecule is not wet. Indeed, a handful of water molecules are not wet. Wetness is a property that only emerges when you have quite a lot of water molecules. An individual organism cannot communicate with others. Communication is a property that emerges when you have more than the one organism. And there are lots of things in physics and in chemistry and in biology that emerge. The whole of nanotechnology, for example, relies on certain properties not being present at a very small scale, but are present at larger scales.
By my profession, I'm a medical scientist in cancer research. I know the definition of science. I've been trained in science also. So I know the definition of science. So what I'm referring to that, whatever modern science or even you go to ancient science, we believe in scientists that you have to have objectivity. And you take a hypothesis, you have an object, and you go in and experimentally if you can prove. That is what is science is. So I'm not sure you are lumping other things in that science. So that is what I mean. You can say material science.
Perhaps I mean that's one kind of science, that science can be expanded in a way. So Newtonian science has its place, but it's not all that is. But I take what
this is not the idea of bringing this issue. Not going in the wordings. Yes, I know the science. And this is not science, I'm saying objective and subjective. Science is used to be trying to find the answers in objective way. That is what science does. And in objective way, you cannot find answer to something which is subjective.
Maybe I can say something else on this topic. When we think about what the object is, we say object and subject. The object is what is before our thought, and thought is what we think about the object. If the object is what we think about it as being, or we can say if the object is what we know it to be. When we speak about what we're saying the object, it's what we know it to be. That knowing what the object is an integration of subject and object. It's not that there is an object opposed to a subject, and they're in two different realms. The object is what we know it to be, what our thoughts about it are. It is the actual embodiment of our thoughts, in that sense. See, so there's no difference between subject and object when we come to that level. Although, from a more careful philosophical analysis, what we're talking about is being and thought. The object means what is an immediate thought, but what we don't think about in that sense. And as soon as we think about it, that being becomes converted into what we think it is. So thought and being, in many different ancient philosophies, are understood to be identical, although different at the same time. So there's an identity and difference existing between thought and being that has been known for many thousands of years, actually. And Hegel very brilliantly presents it in his philosophy in the more recent times. So this kind of breakdown or opposition that people hold in their mind between objectivity, subjectivity, spirit, matter, and all these things, I was trying to explain in my lecture. There is a different way of seeing it. And I think that we can best use the word degree. It's a matter of degree. Spirit is a degree of consciousness. We could say unconsciousness. And spirit that knows itself as spirit is a degree of perfect consciousness or complete consciousness. So the difference between spirit and matter is one of degree and not one of opposition. Something like you have sound and silence. Now, if you turn up the volume, you have sound. If you turn down the volume, you have silence. But it's not that silence and sound are not connected with one another. They're directly connected. When the volume is up, you hear sound. When the volume is down, you have silence. You understand? It's just a matter of degree of attenuation. So consciousness is like that. Matter is attenuated consciousness. And spirit is full consciousness, awakened consciousness. I don't know how better to explain it. Our theory, the quantum theory, represents our consciousness of the world, our knowledge of the world, and not the world itself. Now, Kant made a distinction between the thing in itself and the phenomenal world. Phenomenal means that which is appearing to our senses, or the appearance of reality, and the reality itself. Quantum theory has kind of come on the side of our consciousness of the world as being the source of our knowledge of what is going on. Yet, science takes what they call the naive realistic view, that our perception of the world is the world, without considering the whole process of conception and consciousness of how that works to produce our perception of the world. There is a difference between the two, you can understand it. Think of it from an epistemological point of view. So how to bring those two together? Well, they're already together. You can't have an appearance without that which is appearing. In other words, an appearance of something is related to that thing that is appearing. It's not that the appearance comes and then there's nothing behind it. The appearance and that which is appearing are both connected already. So it's just a matter of understanding what we're doing. It's not that there is no real world, that we're only dreaming it or something like that. That's part of it. But there is also a real world. And like I said, when I introduced Hegel's idea of reality by and for itself, that is the reality. It's not only a physical reality, but there's a spiritual reality that we're in touch with. And we have a relationship with, and a very personal and conscious relationship with that. That's what I'm saying. So it's already, if we think about it clearly, the problem is already solved. The problem comes when we don't think clearly. Then we face so many different problems. Understand?
Nature may have created such a situation that human beings become humble. So, for example, we hear a lot here, life comes from life. Origin of life and consciousness is Brahman. I mean, that is not truth. That's not fact. That is a theory. So, we have to discuss this kind of theory with the other kind of theory, which they are rich source. For example, the Libet experiment. You don't discuss Libet experiment here, but I think the Libet experiment is related to consciousness from scientific perspective. So, if you bring these two kind of groups together to discuss a Libet experiment from modern scientific perspective and Vedantic perspective, you may find convergent views as well as opposite views. That will be very exciting.
This reflects the conversation that we've had on the scientific basis of consciousness on Google Groups. The question is the difference between describing something scientifically, as you're asking about, versus knowing or being directly. And both are valid sources of information. But if we're trying to build science, we have to put it in certain logical terms that can be manipulated by logic. If I have a direct experience of enlightenment or some supreme state, it's very personal, and it occurs to me in a very personal way, my mind will immediately try to interpret it, and the only way I can interpret it is according to other personal experiences, maybe some cultural inputs. But those terms in which I understand my experience and try to interpret it will not necessarily be terms of reference that can be manipulated by logic.
I have a question. Why, we emphasize so much about atoms, molecules, and forces, and why we want to exclude the concepts of soul and the concept of God, the concept of, all these, what I can say, charity or even affection, all these things that we see in our reality as a human being, as a living entity, which we experience. But science seems to be not giving much emphasis to that, which philosophy and religion gives. So how, what is the, what is the fundamental, what is the basis or the empirical basis that we say that we just don't study that and we only study this? What is the basis of that judgment? That sticks.
Well, that's for you.
I mean, one very standard answer is that most of science, as we know, is concerned with a rather objective analysis of data where the data are robust and much the same data are gathered by whoever attempts to collect the data. So many scientists I know are very comfortable talking about notions of the soul or beauty or faithfulness, human virtues, but it's just outside of their particular professional area of expertise. It's like many professional musicians are very happy chatting about poetry or painting, but it's not part of professional music. Mathematics, of course, as a discipline, roughly speaking, has got rather little to say about anything except mathematics. So that's quite a modest defence, isn't it, of science? And then those people here who know more than I do about some sciences, like psychology and sociology, gradually they've been able to make more robust advances, not about the soul, but about many things like friendship or human companionship, where one can make quite useful statements within science which complement other ways of knowing. And the one quick anecdote I'll tell is some of you may know of a wonderful attempt about 150 years ago to determine the mass, the weight of the human soul, which was done by a chap who spent hours sitting by people waiting for them to die, having recorded their body mass, and then quickly took it immediately after they died, and came up with this answer, which I think from memory was 19 grams as the mass of the human soul. It's not nowadays thought to be the right way to try and investigate the nature of the soul.
Yeah.
In my understanding of Western thought, when Descartes, in a sense, did split God from the material world, there were certain people who recognized a certain incoherence in that logic. If we know the external by what it causes to us internally, all we can know is the internal, and there's a logical contradiction. And there are two branches of Western thought that go from there. And when you follow Kant, Hegel, Bradley, what you see is the form of Western thought that took Hume seriously and refused to accept an ontology of knowing that relied on an epistemic gap between the inside and the outside. But you also see very strong efforts, not so much from Darwin, but people using Darwin, and then particularly Bertrand Russell in 1911, very much attacked the idea of intrinsic properties, or internal relations. And internal relations meaning that part of what constitutes A is its relationship with B. That sort of thoroughgoing relationality lies at the core of holism. And that's the type of relationality the German idealists were, and then the British idealists were trying to sustain in Western thought, that was specifically attacked so that external relationality could become the dominant way of thinking. And I would argue that 20th century Western thought is the total swing from internally related thoughts to the notion of everything being externally related. And I think now in Western thought we're seeing a swing back toward relationality and holism.
Hegel. What I want to suggest in this talk is that Hegel reconciles science and religion and objectivity and subjectivity as well, the issues that John was raising for us, by showing how science and objectivity, the pursuit of objective truth, are both aspects of God, who is the ultimate subject. Besides science and objectivity, other aspects of God, we'll get to the notion of what that is. I will address the question of what we mean by that word, God, Other aspects of God include religion, ethics, the arts, and philosophy. Being aspects of the same single ultimate reality, each of these, science, religion, ethics, the arts, and philosophy, they must all be practiced in a way that respects all of the others, because they're respected aspects of the same thing. But what would an ultimate reality be? You might think, in a rather modern vein, that reality is simply what's objective. And the science is the authority on that, if there is any authority. In that case, no reality would be any more ultimate or less ultimate than any other. That's the flat universe, so to speak, no dimension of higher or lower. But Hegel proposes a different conception of reality. What's most real, he suggests, is what it is by virtue of itself, and not by virtue of its relations or interactions with other things. How could something be what it is by virtue of itself? This idea is not quite as strange as it looks at first glance. Consider an example. When I merely react unthinkingly to my surroundings, I'm like an extension of those surroundings. I'm not functioning as myself in any significant way. Whereas if I think what to do or to believe, I am functioning as myself, and thus I'm more real as myself. If I lost a particular opinion or desire, I would still be entirely me. I can do without any of them. But if I lost my thinking, I would be no better than an automaton, and no longer real as myself. So by acting thoughtfully, or on the other hand, thoughtlessly, I can be more or less real as myself at different times. I suspect we all experience both the extremes and many situations in between. So this is why Socrates promoted the examined life. It makes us real as ourselves. Through the examined life, Hegel says, we have a more intensive reality. More intensive because it makes us more ourselves, more fully ourselves. Because science seeks knowledge rather than just to confirm our pre-existing opinions, science contributes to this more intensive reality in us. So this is how science is an aspect of a more intensive reality, what I called earlier the ultimate reality. But religion, ethics, the arts, and philosophy are also aspects of this more intensive reality. Ethics is an aspect of the more intensive reality, insofar as ethics asks us to act in ways that may not correspond to what we initially want. It asks us to act more thoughtfully. And insofar as ethics reflects our capacity for thinking and not just our initial urges, it makes us more ourselves than we would otherwise be. The arts are aspects of the ultimate reality, insofar as they have an inner logic that doesn't merely reflect our existing desires or conventional rules. This is why we find outstanding works of art inspiring, as we say. They suggest something that's higher or more intensive in a way that we ourselves would like to be higher or more intensive, more fully ourselves. Religion, too, is an aspect of this more intensive reality, in as much as it asks us to act justly or to love our neighbor and so forth, and holds out a higher ideal in contrast to our initial desires, our self-importance, and the rest. But you might wonder, doesn't religion subject us to an alien power, which we often conceive of God as something other than ourselves, and thus make us less ourselves and less real as ourselves. Religion does not do this. I'll just give you a few quotes here. Does not do this if the kingdom of God is within you, as we are told in the Gospel of Luke. And it doesn't do it if, and this is St. Paul, in God we live and move and have our being. That is a mystical variety of religion, such as Hegel promotes, does not have the consequence that God is something other which makes us less ourselves by dominating us. And in promoting this, what I'm calling briefly a mystical version of religion, Hegel is following Plato, Aristotle, Plotinus, and others in the West, and his work also resembles that of Shankara, and it resembles the doctrines of the Buddha nature, which is in everything. But yet it's somehow higher. So this mystical view is still religion, deserves that term, inasmuch as it distinguishes something that is higher from something that's lower. In that way, it captures religious notions like creation, faith, and salvation or enlightenment. In the mystical view, we become fully ourselves by abandoning our lower so-called selves of desire and self-centeredness, which made us dependent on our relations to others, and thus not fully ourselves. The paradox of self-centeredness that is very much about I'm not concerned. What I'm not concerned with is everybody else, right? But in being negative in that way, self-centeredness makes itself entirely dependent on its relationship to all these things that it's excluding. So to be fully ourselves, we cannot be self-centered. So this is how the sciences, the arts, ethics, and religion all contribute to a higher, more ultimate reality in which we are more fully ourselves. This ultimate reality is what Hegel calls absolute spirit. As for philosophy, which I haven't mentioned yet, it contributes to this ultimate reality by clarifying how all the other cultural modes contribute to the ultimate reality. And thus philosophy makes it clear how none of these cultural modes should be thought of as excluding or conflicting with the other.
First thing is that reciprocal relation between part and whole. So for example, a seed is there. From a seed is a part of a tree, a fruit. From the seed, the entire tree is coming. So there is a reciprocal. The seed is the cause of the whole, and the tree, and the whole tree is the cause of the seed. Chicken is cause of the egg, and egg is the cause of the chicken. And you cannot make it more simple than that. Then next is that assimilation from environment by which the system of life maintains, develops, and objectifies itself. So this is negation of food and this type of ideas will come here, and then maintains its species by the process of self-preservation by reproduction. So by these 3 points, we see the functioning of natural teleology in nature, in life systems. So we must have some idea of the Vedantic view, where spirit is the basis. Beginning, spirit means which is essentially which is free, which is not bound by natural or mechanical laws. So it is based upon an inquiry called Brahma Jigyasa, and the body is considered to be gross and the subtle reality, and consciousness have 5 stages that we see all around us. Covered consciousness, like plants are considered to be covered consciousness, and Shanka means insects, etc. Like Sankuchita, Mukrita means human life begins when this inquiry is beginning. Who am I? This type of inquiry begins, then it's opening up. Then when it develops further, there are 2 further stages. The completely realized stage is called Purna Vikasita. And we have introduced new ideas like identity in difference. Not just identity or difference, but identity just like this hand has 5 fingers. So these 5 fingers are also distinct. Yet these 5 fingers are the 5 fingers constituting the hand. In the hand they are one. So therefore they are one in their difference. This type of idea is necessary when we approach biology, which is not their mechanism.
So, scientists who are claiming that life is nothing but just a mechanical system, they could never answer these 2 simple questions. What is the minimum number of parts that are essential for a living organism to survive? By what mechanism do these parts get assembled together? We don't have answer to these 2 simple questions. I can, list what are the parts that we have for a laptop, for an instrument that I am holding, and I know the mechanism how to, assemble this system. So if I'm given the manual, then I can do that. But we don't have, answer to these 2 simple questions. Those who are, claiming living organisms are just machines. So Darwinism, the concept of Darwinism also followed the same, trend, and it tried to, put the organism to, a machine kind of, vision. It does not emphasize anything called soul or consciousness, thinking, feeling, love, affection, anger, frustration, all those things that we have in life, that is not emphasized in this concept of evolution. That concept of, mechanistic, understanding of the world. But we do experience those things. That's why we are having this conference for science and scientists. Science must include the study of scientists. Because science is a product of scientists' activity, the thinking, or the explanation, narration of the observation that he is having. But the same science somehow ignores the scientist's inner realm. He is also feeling happy, unhappy, anger, all these activities. What kind of theories we have for science of happiness? We don't have all those concepts in science because of overemphasis to mechanistic idea. So evolutionary views are when Darwin was proposing his ideas are basically supported by the fossil records. And history is always a mystery to the science. If somebody asks me 5 days or 7 days back, in this time, what food I consume, no scientist can tell me. What is my date of birth? No scientist can tell me. Only the persons who witnessed my birth can give me what is my date of birth. They can give some rough estimation of this or that, but date of birth cannot be predicted. Same thing. Who is your father? If somebody asks, then you have to depend on mother. Some indication has to be given to even to do DNA test. You cannot do DNA test all over the world. If your father is outside this world in space, we don't know where we can get it. So some hint is necessary, some direction is necessary, and that is not so clear and precise when we talk about history in modern science. And evolution deals with history. And we are, giving emphasis to the fossil record and the dating techniques that was used for the fossil record is based on the simple assumption that the rock forms, the sedimentary rock forms, layer after layer. But this scientist, Guy Ritter, he did a very fundamental experiments on the deposition patterns. And Ritter has given some interesting idea that the rock formation is not an outcome of layer by layer deposition. It depended on the direction of the fluid flow and the particles of the rocks, different particles. If you got a rock, you see different colors. That indicates different layers. As if one layer formed and another kind of layer formed. The assumption of Nicholas Steno. But this scientist, I have no time to show the video. But this scientist came up with the idea that in the experimental laboratory, you can visit this website to see the videos of his experiments. So what he explained that all the layers they form simultaneously and it dependent on the fluid motion. The Nicholas Steno's explanation is that there is a still fluid and the particles are depositing and one layer after another layer formed. So evolutionists
or the explanation of the time scale that they give, the bottom of the rock is the oldest one and the top of the rock is the youngest one. But what he has explained from his experimental evidence is that it's the direction of the fluid flow that decides the chronology. So when you say all the layers are growing simultaneously, then the top layer can be older and bottom layer can be younger, because it is a growth in the direction of the fluid flow. It's not a all the rock that is forming simultaneously layer after layer. So this is very interesting experiment. Details you can find in the website. Basically, scientists, those who are honest enough, they have given some what you can say, they are honest conclusive statements. As St. George being quoted by Professor Baluska in the morning also. And he says, as scientists attempt to understand a living system, they move down from dimension to dimension, from one level of complexity to the next lower level. I followed this course in my own studies. I went from anatomy, the study of tissues, then to electron microscopy and chemistry, and finally to quantum mechanics. This downward journey through the scale of dimension had its irony, for in my search for the secret of life, I ended up with atoms, electrons, which have no life at all. Somewhere along the line, life has run out through my fingers. So in my old age, I am now tracing my steps, trying to find my way back. So we are breaking the things into try to find out what is there. For example, I can say this building is there. An alien scientist comes here, and we ask, my dear scientist, please tell me how this building came. We don't know how this building came and what are the procedures are there. What a scientist will do, he will break the building to find out what material it is made of. And he will find out what are the forces involved. But he will not tell us that there is a mind involved to organize those things. What Professor Kahneman was saying, the only material cause or efficient causes, they are not enough. There is something, involvement of mind, a form of cause. And then the final cause is there, the purpose, why this building, the architect is manufactured. So in Vedanta, we are talking about not only these are four causalities, there is an original cause. Sarva karana karana, cause of all causes. How we can come back to that concept. So in modern science, we are only limited ourselves to material cause and efficient cause. So we are not going more than that. Shapiro, James Shapiro, we often quote him. He is a student of Bhagavat Vedanta, and he has a very interesting book, Evolution and View from 21st Century. So, many scientists, they think life can be explained based on the success of informatics. So, the Shapiro's, very, important, interesting conclusion is that DNA plus 0 implies 0. DNA by itself cannot do anything. I mean, it cannot replicate itself, it cannot do proofreading, or the whatever things that we are thinking that DNA is doing in a cell, it does not do all those things. Rather, it is a cell which uses its intelligence to exhibit all those extraordinary functions of those molecules. If you say hand is doing all these activities, then it is a mistake. If you cut the hand, hand does not do anything. Hand is used to do certain things. And it is up to the sentient individual whether to hold this instrument or to push something. What the hand will be used up to the individual entity, how he uses it. The function does not come from a chemical structure of this hand, the way biologists are thinking. So they have to think more deeply about the activities that living entities are exhibiting, and that will give some interesting conclusion, rather than focusing what Shapiro said that we should move away from this narrow-minded concept that DNA can reveal everything. As if we are looking for like lamppost where the key is lost and we are searching around the lamppost, because everywhere else is darkness, we cannot do anything else. So there is some light, there is a lamppost, and we are searching the key or secret of life there in the DNA. But we have to see the whole cell and the intelligence in the concept. So I would like to say in this context, my Diksha Gurudev, Srila Bhakti Swarup Damodar Maharaj, he met Professor Stanley Miller, who given what you can say, so-called experimental, what you can say, success and emphasis, as if he produced so-called building blocks of life. So he was giving a lecture when my Guru Maharaj was doing his postdoctoral studies, and he asked a question to Professor Miller. Professor Miller was saying, I will produce all these biomolecules, then I will produce life in the laboratory. Then he raised the hand and asked the question.
Professor Miller, if I supply you all the biomolecules that life requires, can you produce life in the laboratory? He said that I don't know. Then what is the, our efforts, where it is going? We are producing all the biomolecules, but we are not giving the emphasis. Can we produce life from those biomolecules? And Sripad Bhaktimadhava Puri Maharaj, as in the morning John Walton introduced, he met Professor George Ward. He was having also the same concept, same idea. He was saying that somehow life came from, chemicals. But Sripad Puri Maharaj told him, Professor Ward, why don't you consider the opposite? That matter comes from life. We are living from our body, the nails are growing, the hairs are growing, a tiny seed is producing such gigantic mass. So why not the opposite? Why not you consider that? And he transformed his whole life by just this simple explanation that Sripad Puri Maharaj received from his Gurudev, Srila Sripad Vedanta Prabhupada.
And the idea of self-organization is fundamental in my work. And here I have examples of self-organization in 3 levels: chemistry, physics, chemistry, and cell biology. And I don't have time to go into details, but it's clear, things are organized at very different levels. And I have some more examples of organization. This is called carbon plate, as you probably have known this. You put some sprinkles of particles on the plate, and you cause vibration of the plate with a bowl, and then you see the particles organizing into geometric patterns like that. You can see this on video online. This is an organization, but it's not a self-organization. In this case, energy comes from outside of the system being organized. So this is what I call other organization. And self-organization is different. But you see, if you include the person causing this vibration, you could call this as self-organized. So the idea of self-organization has some philosophical significance. Here's another example of other organization. This is a pool of water in a dish. You put in some sound waves and take picture from top. And this pattern is due to the water density variations caused by sound waves. And this is sonic energy only, and this is sonic energy plus metabolic energy. This has a cell only and in water, and this is cell plus glucose. So when cells are metabolizing glucose, it affects the water structure, which can be captured by a method known as a cinoscope, invented by an Englishman, Reed, in around 2000, early 2000. And this is a human blood. Instead of these cells, we put hemoglobin without vibrational energy. When you put vibrational energy into it, this blood absorbs energy and causes pattern formation like that, which you can capture. Anyway, this is an example of organization. So organization is everywhere, and one way to organize things is by sound waves.
We are being educated in a very restricted way. Now, I know that sounds a very global comment, but I don't think I have much more time to develop it now. And so I think really I'm just going to end up by saying there's a lot of knowledge about consciousness here in this Guru Maharaj has initiated and created
in Vedantic view, and we have heard the term dharma very much. Dharma is defined fairly clearly in Mahabharata. Dharana iti dharma. What characterizes a thing, an entity, is a dharma. If you ask what is the dharma of a fire, it burns. What is the dharma of a river to flow? What is the dharma of a bird to fly? Now, the more difficult question, what is the dharma of a human being? That's not an easy question. But there is an answer, more or less it fits any human being. And what is that? To inquire, to search. This is very, I think it's very universal. And this inquiry, of course, takes many, many approaches because there are so many of us in the universe. And so this whole process of inquiry, we can kind of classify in terms of the science, varieties of science that we saw, art, philosophy, education. There are so many approaches for inquiry. Now, what is the purpose of this inquiry? Nature is inquiry of human. The purpose is to arrive at a common vision that the individual, as we heard, ultimate reality or absolute reality or love everything, whatever may be the words that we use, and that is referred as Atman. It is all-pervading consciousness. In fact, the great sage Yajnavalkya said, Ayambaha paramo dharmaha yet yogena atmadarshanam. He said the parama dharma, that means the characteristic of the human being that is said as an inquiry will reach its fulfillment within the inquirer. That is when the subject itself becomes the object. As we refer in Tompkins' Wonderland, great scientist Isaac George Gamow said this person keeps on inquiring everything about the world outside, but then finally he comes to the question, who am I? I have been observing everything, but I didn't get a chance to observe myself. So that's the final, the Atman that we say. Now, the last point to conclude is, what do we get out of this vision of Atman? Then the love of all that John referred this morning, or this afternoon. So this seeing everything, being happy, sharing that happiness, being the transmitter of that vision that everyone will get eventually, and that's what it is, and that's what this conference has done, because we have learned from each other, we have expanded ourselves, our consciousness has expanded. I'm sure every one of us have learned something that we did not know, and we also came with the experience that there is more to know, more to expand. That's all.
What I think I will take away intellectually is something about the fundamental importance of consciousness in all of matter. And this is not a subject about which I previously had given a great deal of thought. So I've been emailing academics back in the UK asking for papers of theirs, people I know who write, for example, about panpsychism. And I think it's an area I'll carry on reading and thinking about. So thank you all very much indeed.
Yes, I've had the wonderful sense that we're all working on the same thing. Not only intellectually, but spiritually, emotionally, practically. And we better figure out how to work on the same thing, right? And how to get it right. We can't just talk to ourselves. We've got to pull this thing together. Internationally, globally. And the way this group the steps that this group takes in that direction are quite wonderful. We are obviously speaking a number of different languages here. Everybody has their own conceptual structure or terminology and particular background, but we're all listening and learning, and I think we're going to get better at communicating and synthesizing among ourselves and with the world at large. And I find this very encouraging. Very happy to have been here.
Yes. I have to have, pardon? Yes, no, I'm just going to say my little bit first. I've been working with ideas of consciousness for since the 1980s, I think you know. But I think it's not been the subject within the academic world. I think this is going to become increasingly so. There's lots of indications, and even listening to you, Michael, and saying what you're doing, I think that's happening a lot, which I think is absolutely great. In my paper, but not so much in my speech, I wanted to thank you, Madhava Puri Maharaj, for your vision in creating this conference, and it's the 7th, and I think each time there's the opportunity for the rich exchange of ideas. So I think your role in bringing together such a diversity of people on a regular basis is tremendous. And of course I have got to thank Dr. Muni and Dr. Shanta, because the two of you put so much effort into making this work. And and of course to all the people who support you in the background. And just to close, I mean, just because you were talking about panpsychism, embedded in my presentation, but I didn't get the chance to play any of it, was a TED Talk by David Chalmers. He was invited to this conference, but was double booked, so wasn't able to come. He doesn't come from a Vedantic point of view, but he's one of the first people to talk about consciousness in 1994, the hard problem and the easy problem. And he is very slowly evolving towards a panpsychic point of view and considering the idea that consciousness is universal or consciousness is fundamental. That's a huge shift for him, because he calls himself a materialist scientist by nature, but staying with that hard scientific route, he can't avoid the fact that consciousness has a much more fundamental role in the universe. So I think when people like David Chalmers are moving to that point of view, that it's going to open up consciousness. And I do think the Vedantic tradition has a huge amount to offer that, because you've been exploring that idea since 1500 BC. So we've got a lot of catching up to do. So thank you very much, all of you. And now I think Dr. Muni, you're going to give us a summary of the whole event.
Spoke that within the Western world there has been a substantial exploration of the idea that consciousness plays a more fundamental role in the universe than Newtonian science allows. Consciousness is a subject that has received increasing attention since David Chalmers introduced the idea of the heartbeat of consciousness in 1994. Quantum physics is telling that we live more in a participatory universe. Robert Wallace, Ph.D., who is author of Hegel's philosophy of reality, freedom and God, spoke in his Science of God that Hegelian conception follows Plato and Aristotle in important ways. And like them, it resembles Asian thought in as much as it does not pit faith against reason. Hegel integrates science, religion, and the natural and supernatural by showing how science, religion, ethics, the arts, and philosophy are all necessary aspects of a single self-determining reality whose traditional name is God. Professor Balram Singh, Ph.D. from the Botulinum Research Center School of Indian Studies, Institute of Advanced Sciences, Massachusetts, USA, spoke on expansion of science by its integration with Harvey concepts of origin of matter and evolution. That science is very dynamic in the sense that there is a difference between what science is today and what it can be. According to the bviscs philosophy, there are 9 elements and change in one will affect all others. So therefore, we cannot separate any element from any other. So some kind of unity is to be explored there. He examined the question of evolution and suggested that intention must have a role in determining evolution. Dr. Sumangala Devi spoke on why life cannot be seen as a machine working on physical laws. And finally, Professor Sungchul G spoke about semiotics, which makes contact with the Schillinger model as a synchronic and diachronic model of the universe. So, and then finally, we have this session, and to say some concluding words, the experience of history teaches us that happiness is not possible only by material acquisitions. True knowledge is the result of a humble approach which is part of any spiritual tradition and must also be an integral feature of scientific endeavor. Science and religion cannot remain exclusive to each other. Rather, science and religion can go together by discovering the true concept of harmony, which makes human more rational. And the more rational one becomes, one perceives the finiteness of the human capacity and welcomes the higher help that is indicated in all religious traditions. 21st century is all about an honest dialogue and integration of multidisciplinary views. We hope that science and scientists in the conference has been able to initiate this most important mission of the rarely achieved human form of life. Finally, we take this opportunity to thank all the volunteers and helping hands. We specifically mention Sripad Bhakti Madhav Puri Maharaj Ph.D, our sister Gurudev. He is the source of the guiding vision and theme of the Science and Scientists Conference. Without his grace, love and affection and depth of conception, this conference will not be possible. We also mention Srila Bhakti Dev Acharya Maharaj, who is the President Sebai Acharya of the Sri Saraswati for giving his blessings upon this humble effort. We also thank all devotees from New York, Sripad Dasraj Prabhu, Kushum Devi, Sripad Vachan Prabhu and his family, Sripad Krishna Keshav Prabhu and his parents, Teresa and Ingo Rolke, who are also present here, and Irina. We also acknowledge the help of all the members of World Within Vision and all others who have given their valuable advice as well as various important support during the conference. We are also thankful to Sri G.W.F and Dr. Bhagavat Vedanta for their help and interest in promoting the conference, our conference in USA. We also thank all student volunteers from Rutgers University and for all their help in sincere service. We thank all the speakers, delegates, and guests for making the event a grand success. Thank you.
Namaste.